Hello, welcome to this video. We're gonna have a look at data fetching in solid start. So we're gonna have a look at the createAsync primitive. We're gonna have a look at the use server directive, what it does and how we use it. We're gonna have a look at the cache function that can be used to wrap our data getter functions. And we're gonna have a look at the suspense component, how it works. And we also gonna have a look at the error boundary component and how this works, how we can use it to optimize our app. And so let's jump right in. So we're gonna need a function that returns some data first, right? I'm gonna write a function that returns the current date and time that helps us to see when the function is actually being rerun, right? So we can see it right away. And we're gonna make it async, although it's not, just, so that we have it. And we just gonna return new date and say dot to local string. All right. So is our function. And now we're gonna also make a cached version of that function that we're gonna call const get cached date. And we're gonna bring in the cache wrapper from solid router. Just put our get date function in there, and also we have to provide a key for the cache. And I usually take the function name. Now in this case, get date. All right. So then in our component, we're gonna call those functions. So first we're gonna say, const date, and bring in the createAsync primitive, and then call our getDate function in here. And we also gonna do the same with the cached version. Yep, I take it. That looks good. Gonna make this, and we're also gonna put a cached in here so that it's clear that this is our cached version. All right, server is running. Let's have a look at a page. Okay, maybe we need to add a little bit more styling to this. Text 5XL and text white. Yeah, it's reload, so it's bigger now. Okay, now let's explore a little bit how the normal function versus the cached function works. Now on initial render on the server, they both look the same. Now if we reload the page, they both will update, right? So every reload will also force the cache to rerun, and both functions will be refetched and we'll get a new date. So now what happens if we change the route? So we go to the about page and come back, and both are updated. Now let's make that more quickly. And now you see, if I move quickly back and forth, now this cached function will just keep the data of the previous cached version. So the cache function doesn't always rerun. There is a little bit of a time delay when solid start will kind of invalidate because the data is expired. I think it's 3 seconds at the moment. So if we less than 3 seconds on a different page, this will not refresh, right? So you see it's 5 seconds already out of sync. Okay. Same is for browser back. So if I wait a little bit and then hit browser back, now the uncached version will update while the cached version will still display the previous data. Okay, so it will not refetch. And what you also might have noticed is if we render on the server, I get English time format, and if I client route, I get my browser locale, which is German because I'm Germany, and so it will render out the German one for this one. As long as this is not updated client side, it will still show the server version. So what we can do, I mean, it's just a little bit example, but at the moment, if we don't use a use server directive, this function will be called from the server on the server. So that's important to note. If we don't put a use server in here, and for example, we try to access a cookie, then we have to be aware that this function might run sometimes on the server and sometimes on the client. So sometimes the cookie will be in the request event and sometimes the cookie will be in the document, right? So to get around this, we can say use server inside this function. Now this will always run on the server, no matter what, also on client-side routing. And the result now is that if we refresh the page, now this is server rendered, and also when we client route, we will always get the English format from the server, okay? Because now this function always runs on the server. We're gonna have a deeper look at that in a different video where we explore deeply how we can design those functions and run it on the server. So if you have an app that accesses a database, you will probably wrap every one of those functions inside your server because you cannot access the DB on the client, obviously. So we will use server everywhere on every of those functions. All right. So now we got this. What you can do to force a refresh on the client is either with server actions, which I will cover in a different video, or you can use a button and use the built-in revalidate function. So click, we can call revalidate, and in here we can use this cached function. You can either provide the string of the key, or you can also use the get cache date and say dot key. Then if you change the key in the future, you don't have to update this here, right? So now we have this button revalidate, and now if we click this cached function will update. The uncached function will not update, as you see. Okay. So that's a way to update this function. So now we're gonna add a little bit of a delay in here. And we're gonna make this 3 seconds. So first let's have a look at the page. Now, because it takes so long, you will see nothing but the background for 3 seconds. Show it again. So it took now 3 seconds to rerun this, and if we change the routes, the same will happen. It will now take 3 seconds. I clicked already, and will now take 3 seconds for the page to transition. So then it's not really a cool experience, right? But why is that? Reason is that the app has suspended now as long as this async function runs. And at the moment, we only have one suspense boundary at the top of our app. So when the app suspenses, everything will suspend, okay? So the cool thing about Solid Start is we can use nested suspense. So good practices, we can first, let's wrap it at the top level, right here, and then make this in here. So let's make a top level suspense on our page. Now we will see everything that's outside of our page, like the navigation, but everything that's in our page will be suspended and a fallback is rendered. So if we don't pass a fallback, nothing is rendered. We can pass a fallback and say preloading, maybe also say here class FXL. Now we're loading. Now we see the fallback rendered, right? Same for page transitions. Now the page is loading. And then we get the rest of our page. Now we have a few parts in our page that are actually not depending on the async data, right? Like our header, which is static, and maybe this button here. So we can also move this suspense down here and just wrap those parts of our page which are using async data. And what happens now is you see everything else is rendered and only the async data will be replaced with the fallback. Same for page transitions. If we go to the page, you see it right away. Everything statically is rendered, and then we wait for our async data to come in. So there's no premature, like in React, you don't have to return early or something like that and render something different. Suspense will handle all of that stuff for you right away in a very cool way, right? So cool. Now we could also wrap each of those independently, right? So if we go to the page and come back, it's reloading. Now if we get the cache data back, we also have the cool experience now that we display directly our cache data while our uncached data is fetched again and it needs to wait. So caching also provides a quicker way of rendering the page. So what else can we do to speed up page loading? There's also a preload for the route available. Now in file routing, we export a object called route, const route. No. And we type this as satisfies route definition. So then we get the help from TypeScript preload, and preload provides a function where we can run the cache date. It doesn't work for the date. Now this cache comes in handy because what we can do now in the preload function is already pre-populate the cache before we actually come to the page. And for this purpose, we're gonna add in a console login here. Or maybe we add a console login here, right? So preloading route. So when does this function run? This function runs when we hover over a link or the mouse enters a link to a page. Then solid start will trigger this preload function and then load the data into the cache. So then when we actually visit the page, the data might be already there. Now we have a delay of 3 seconds. Let's see how this turns out. But even if the promise is not resolved and only 2 seconds have passed, then it will still take only 1 more second for the page to reload. So let's go to the about page and clear our console. And now if I enter with the mouse on the home, you will see that the preload function will run and trigger the cache to render, to load the data. Preloading. So if I now click on the page, this data is already there and updated, right? While this is still running. So we can have a lot quicker response times. And you see now, even though the cache function is not fully resolved, it will still be quicker because the call to the API has already been initialized in the background, right? So we can have a lot of smoother page transitions and quicker page loading and provide a much better user experience by using this preload function. right? So this will always be quicker than the uncached version. And what this cache also enables is deduping the same requests. So if we create a child component, I'm just gonna copy that here. And say that, call that child. And I add that child in here. I'll just comment out this one here, right? And we move this out as well. So now you will see in the network tab that if we revalidate, there will be only one run to the server, right? Although we use it in multiple components and fetch it multiple times, through the cache key, Solid Start will see that this is the same function call to the same API and run it only once and just share the data through the cache to those functions. So that's pretty cool. So you can have co-location of data fetching and you don't have to worry about waterfalls and all that kind of stuff. Also, the same applies for this one, right? Although we fetch them in the same component, it doesn't wait for the first one to finish and then call the second one. It will fetch them all in parallel by default in Solid. So that's really, really cool. All right, so let's remove this again. We don't need this. And have a look at the error boundary. So for this purpose, we're gonna occasionally create an error that happens every time. If we say 1 equals 1, then we throw an error, new error, error. And by the way, did you realize that we have full type safety in here? If I'd change this to a object and say date, then this will tell me that I have an accessor of type date string. Cool, isn't it? So we have full type safety with this createAsync hook. That's so super cool, super powered. No more manual typing of anything. So good. Okay, now error boundaries. So we throw in new error every time. And now let's have a look at the page. We're loading and then bam, oh no, error happened. And now what happened? All the page is gone. We see nothing but the error. And the reason is that we only have an error boundary at the top of our page, right? So this behaves exactly like Suspense, but for errors. And it will render this fallback if we hit an error. And the error boundary also provides this reset function that will re-trigger the rendering of those components if an error happened. So if you're fetching data from the server and you run into an uncalled error because something weird happened, timeout or something like that, you can use this try again. But now, of course, we've implemented an error to happen all the time, so it will happen all the time. So now this is not cool, right? We cannot navigate, we can't do anything anymore. We can do now the same as with Suspense. We can add an error boundary in here, and I'm just gonna copy the one from the app. Too lazy to write a new one. Right, so we put it in here, error boundary, and also wrap this one, error boundary, and we need to import it. Okay. Now what happens is that everything that's independent of that error will still be rendered, right? Right, now let's have a look what happens if we need to use route parameters and pass parameters to our fetching function. And for this purpose, I'm gonna add a new route. I've already prepared in our nav the routes to time and then slash. So we're gonna make a new file and we call that time, and then we make slash, and we call that locale.tsx. And what we're gonna do, we're just gonna copy everything we have in here to our locale. And we don't need a child, remove that. And we're not gonna need the uncached version, so remove that, and also this one. All right, and then let's prepare our function to get some data. And what we're gonna do is say locale, just type string, and then we're just gonna pass that locale in here. And we're gonna give this a default value of en, right? So it works right away. And so now the question is, how do we get this parameter from the route and pass it in here? So we can do that by using the use params hook. So we say params equals use params. And now we got access to those route parameters, and we can say we want to pass that in here, params dot locale, right? So now the cool thing is, even though we stay on the same page or the same route component, solid start will still track if one of the parameters we pass to the cached function changes and then refetch it, right? So if we come to our page here and we click on the English one, it will load. Oh yeah, we still have the error in there, sorry. Gotta remove the error. Right, so now we got our date, and if we switch to German, to the German locale, you will see that we get the German locale. And for the purpose of this, we just also remove the timeout, okay, like this. So if we switch routes, now you can quickly see it will change the locale or the format of the date based on this route parameter, right? And so createAsync automatically tracks if parameters that we pass in here change, and then refetch the data, although we use the cached version, right? So it will revalidate the cache based on the parameters. Super cool, right? All right, so now we've covered createAsync, use server a little bit, suspense and error boundary. If you liked that video, then please subscribe, share, and like, and leave a comment what you want to have covered next, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.